Hello and welcome back to another edition of Press Pass on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Friday, May 20th. It's also a great pleasure to have back in our virtual studio Greg Sukiennik, who covers politics and much more for Vermont News and Media, better known as the Manchester Journal, Bennington Banner, and Brattleboro Farmer. Greg, great to have you back on Press Pass.
Andrew, it's always great to be here. Thank you so much for having me along.
Well, it's always a pleasure and always a lot of fun too, because we have plenty to talk about today with the legislature adjourning and the political season sort of heating up. Boy, there's a lot going on, and I thought maybe we could just start at the very top there. Governor Phil Scott finally announced that he's going to run for a fourth term in the governor's office. I guess that wasn't a big surprise, although he kind of was keeping people guessing, I guess, there when we got to the beginning of this month and still no definite yes or no.
Well, I mean, with the number of folks who were deciding that to walk away for personal reasons or because of the political down, I think maybe that might have added to intrigue that possibly wasn't there. But yes, Governor Scott running for a fourth term, and so far on the Democratic side, Brenda Siegel is the candidate from on the Democratic side from New Fane. No primary contenders yet that I'm aware of, but we'll see. They've got a few more days to file signatures. But what's interesting is the amount of turnover we're going to have in the state Senate and the legislature, as well as some constitutional offices. I think 11 out of 30 senators have told us are not going to be running for their seats. We were talking a little earlier, a number of committee chairs in the House are also stepping down, which leaves some opportunity perhaps for some Southern Vermont lawmakers to step up to some committee chairships if they decide to return and if they win their races. So lots of shuffling.
Why do you think that is this year? Because it does seem like an awful lot of senior cabinet posts: Attorney General, Secretary of State, Treasury Secretary. I know in Treasurer Beth Pierce's case, it's a medical issue.
Yes.
But a lot of it seems like, wow, an awful lot of turnover for a year. And of course, again, a lot of it may be triggered by Pat Leahy stepping down from the state Senate, prompting Peter Welch to run for that seat, prompting then many people running for the Congress, including a couple of the senators who would be leaving. But do you think it's like a case of COVID burnout, or too many Zoom meetings for these folks? And
well, with the folks I've spoken with, it does seem like COVID burnout is a really real thing because, first of all, the work over Zoom is pretty intense, and if you've covered some of those meetings on Zoom, you sort of get some empathy for how exhausting it can be. But really, it's been 2.5 years of just straight ahead trying to deal with crisis, and also largely, governing remotely and not being able to have personal relationships with the folks you work with, and the kinds of relationships that build consensus and make this process work better. So I get the sense from talking to a few people that that's a real thing. And I think in some other cases, there are personal reasons. There are folks who've been particularly in the state Senate. There's folks who've been there for a long time, and they've decided that it's time to step down and let someone else take charge. So that kind of brings us where we are. But getting back to the committee chairs, just thinking about in the House, government operations, and because Sarah Coppola-Hansis is running for Secretary of State, Ways and Means, which means that Emily Kornheiser of Brattleboro, who's presently the vice chair, could possibly be moving up. Kate Webb of Shelburne as education chair, which might offer some opportunity for Kathleen James of Manchester. And then Tim Briglin of Thetford stepping down as well in energy and technology, which has been a key committee in a lot of and broadband issues. And so that might, if Laura Sibilia decides to seek another term from Dover, that might be, that could be a chairmanship that she pursues.
Yeah, it's going to be really fascinating to see who emerges into those chairmanships come next January, and because there really is a more turnover than I can
Right.
remember in quite a
And
long
we'll have a
time.
new pro tem as well, since Becca Ballant is stepping down
Right,
to run.
right,
Notably, Brian Campion and Dick Sears both decided that they were seeking another two-year term.
right.
Just talking to Senator Sears, I think they're. I mean, I think part of his decision was a recognition that there is a need for some experience with so many senators stepping down. There will be a new president of the Senate as well, because though in that case the lieutenant governor candidates, the leading candidates at least, are folks who have a lot of legislative experience: Joe Benning, Kitty Toll, David Zuckerman, who's held the role before. But then there's also the matter of some of the committees where there's shuffling, where folks are stepping down. There's some key committees that might need, sort of added membership. Appropriations in particular really has a lot of folks who are departing. And depending on who, Speaker Jill Krowinski, if she's Speaker again, very much like a high school basketball coach who has a lot of turnover and tries to figure out who to put on the floor, you go with your seniors, or the folks you think are your best players. And so maybe some folks who thought they were going to be leading a committee might wind up, on appropriations because that's where they're needed most. Don't know. I mean, I have no insight as to who that could possibly be. That's just kind of possibly setting the stage. But it certainly will make for a really fascinating November and December once this all shakes out.
One thing that surprises me a bit about all that turnover is that the state is still, I'm not sure if a wash is the right term, but something like that in federal dollars, and has from COVID relief money. The state has probably its best looking balance sheet that it's had in many years. You would think that this would be an opportunity that some of these folks would think, wow, we actually, for the first time in as long as anyone can remember, it's not a case of like, oh my God, do we have $50,000 or $100,000 to do something that sounds great? Now there's we're talking, whoa, we've got millions of dollars to work with. I would think for a lot of them, that would seem like an opportunity that would be hard to resist.
Yes. And a lot of that money has already been allocated. But from the cynical view of that would be, at some point that money is going to run out sooner or later. And some have offered, I'm not sure I believe it, but this is out there, that nobody wants to be left, be the person left holding the bag when the money runs out, because then suddenly we're, that federal money that we've come to rely upon, over the last few years is gone. And we're, sort of in a really serious inflationary curve right now. And, if that leads to sort of pronounced, economic bad times, then that might not be a situation people want to be part of. I really do think, though, that really it's fatigue, that this has just been a very hard 2 years, just like it's been a hard 2 years for police officers and for teachers, and for journalists, frankly. I mean, then again, a lot of that money's already been allocated. I'm just thinking about the budget and thinking about where the state colleges were 2 years ago, and they have another additional, I think it was another $10 million in their annual appropriation, as well as a big chunk of one-time money as well. And we're talking about a system that's reinventing itself, and as of 2 or 3 years ago, was trying to warn everybody that it was really in danger. So there's some opportunity to stick around and see things through too. And I think it all really comes down to where you are and whether you've got other plans that maybe you want to pursue.
Yeah.
If this pandemic has taught us anything, it's taught us that that tomorrow isn't necessarily promised to any of us. And so, I mean, there might be folks who maybe they might have been people who were aiming at, keeping their seats or aiming at something else, or maybe they've decided that they need to get busy living and doing something else.
Like State Senator Chris Pearson, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of folks think that T.J. Donovan will eventually run for governor, but here he is stepping down as AG. So it's, I mean, that's one that comes to mind.
Well, just real quick before we turn over to and have a look at the state budget and where the legislature wound up on some big bills, I just wanted to take a minute to talk a little bit more about the governor's race, because one thing that has really surprised me is the fact that there haven't been any really prominent Democrats stepping forward to run against Phil Scott for governor. Brenda Siegel, of course, ran for, I think, lieutenant governor 2 years ago, lost in the Democratic primary, but has kept her profile high with her work on homelessness and housing. She was involved in that sleep out, I guess, on the steps of the state legislature over the winter, and she'll certainly, be a formidable candidate. Although I don't think she has a whole lot of statewide name recognition. But the fact that there hasn't been another Democrat, and I guess I was expecting T.J. Donovan to be one of them, to say, okay, I'm gonna take a shot at it. I'm sure a lot of them are thinking Scott is unbeatable. He's one of the most popular governors in the entire country. He's still getting credit for navigating the COVID pandemic in its early stages, and that it's just basically, they're going to replay the experience David Zuckerman had 2 years ago, where here was a guy, lieutenant governor, who'd been around to say this for a long time and got crushed in the general election.
Well, I mean, people don't line up to, it's like trying to do distance running under, in really hot weather. Someone once likened that to being hit with a stick and said, you don't get used to getting hit with a stick. So, I mean, people don't like to get into races where they think they're going to get blown out, even if they're sort of doing the loyal thing for the party. But then again, I mean, it happened before I was here, but I mean, did anyone think before the 2014 election that Scott Milne had a snowball's chance of beating Peter Shumlin? And that came down to the legislature. Yeah. So, I mean, funny things can happen, but you can't, you can't win unless you're running. And so it is kind of a bit of surprise to me that some folks don't step up, maybe some higher profile folks step up and say, I mean, maybe Governor, you're a nice guy, but I really disagree with your policy on this, and I really disagree with your veto on this, and so I'm running because I think it's the right thing to do. I'm surprised that there's not more interest in that, frankly. But yeah. It's politics. A lot of politics is timing. I mean, ask anyone who thought that they might have, maybe someone in state government and somewhere in the 70s or 80s thought, well, at some point Patrick Leahy will get bored, and then we know that didn't happen. So sometimes when you sort of wait for the opportunity and you try to take advantage of it when it presents itself, which is why we have so many candidates running for Congress now. So maybe it's nothing more than people just trying to strike when the iron is hot. But it does surprise me. I will have to say that.
Well, and of course, then you have the other scenario unfolding in the lieutenant governor's race, where you have I think 5 Democrats competing in their primary, and I think 2 in the Republican side, Joe Benning and Gregory Thayer. I think he's a town official from Rutland. Clearly, the lieutenant governor race is probably really where the action is this year, because I'm sure a lot of them figure, well, this probably is going to be Scott's last term, and in 2 years, the lieutenant governor is going to be in a prime position to step forward and be a strong candidate for the top job. But
sure.
Still, I think it would seem like an opportunity for somebody to get statewide name recognition. You kind of gain some credit within the party establishment for being a good soldier, trying your best, even if it didn't work out.
Well,
but you can come back in 2 years and be on the inside loop to kind of.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, Peter Welch ran for governor and lost, and that didn't kill his political career.
Right.
So I mean, sometimes. Bernie Sanders ran for Congress a number of times, and he just kind of kept sticking with it until he finally sort of pushed through. So I think maybe we sort of, as Americans, we tend to have sort of a zero-sum view of things, that, if you can make the Super Bowl 4 years in a row, but people remember you for losing those 4 Super Bowls, and the making it doesn't count anymore.
That sounds like
a good way to get state recognition is to put your way on a statewide ballot, even if you have, even if things might not necessarily go your way. I mean, certainly David Zuckerman's probably in good shape to get elected as lieutenant governor because he's been there before and been on a ballot. And Joe Benning and Kitty Toll are going to have to make the case because a stronger case because they don't have that name recognition.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
This is sort of the leading candidate. It's not trying to exclude anybody.
Well, let's just turn then to what the legislature did get accomplished or where it was thwarted in accomplishing. I mean, a couple of things come quickly to mind. I mean, they passed I think it's a record budget of what, $8.2 billion. Clearly, housing was a big issue. I mean, both the governor and the legislature seemed to want to spend a lot of money on housing, but the governor had some issues around that contractor registry, which he called a poison pill. And but in the end, how much money did wind up going to the budget directly for housing? I think it was in the 60
you're putting me on the spot here with an exact number. I don't.
60 to 80 billion was or million.
It's a lot of money,
yeah.
And I think everyone. I think that was part of the reason why the results came out the way they did. If I can sort of dance around not knowing the exact figure, that the housing bills got broken into two pieces. One, which was more assured of passing, and also an Act 250 piece that was more assured of passing because it dealt with village and downtown center development and trying to clear the way for some higher density development in areas that are already have urban cores. And then put some of the aspects that the governor was more likely to disagree with: the contractor registry, the rental registry, again, the forest fragmentation pieces of Act 250, again. So it's I think certainly locally, and we've sort of been this kind of dovetails a little bit with a local issue we've been talking about here in Manchester, which is whether to include town offices in the redevelopment of town-owned parcel in Depot Street with housing in order to make the housing work. And also discussion about short-term rentals. We've really come to the there's really a lot of attention being paid to housing issues right now in the state, and I think people realize that not only have sort of the we've had folks come to us because of COVID because they want to live here full time because they're second homeowners. Well, eventually we might get climate refugees as well. And when we also have a tremendous trouble with a missing middle. And I think there's recognition on all sides that something had to be done. And so there was some compromise. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to find the contractor registry and the rental registry coming back in some form again next year. New legislature or old legislature. I think that those are things they're really they're committed to, despite the fact that the governor doesn't seem interested in them at all. And there's not unanimity among Democratic lawmakers in that either. I mean, those overrides failed for reasons. There's still some folks who were concerned that it's going to affect the hospitality business or or affect people who make their living as landlords. So I don't really have a closing point. Housing was a big focus, and there's some disagreements, but a lot did get done.
Before we move on from the local thing, because I wanted to talk a bit about one other bill that the legislature ultimately failed to override a veto on, the one with the clean heat standard. On Depot Street, I mean, it looks to me like the traffic lights are showing green on that. I mean, I know there are some issues around stormwater and a few other things they need to work through, but do we have any reason to think that 40-unit housing project?
Well, I think there is a real impetus to try to get it done, and the reason that they're thinking about including the town offices is to try to make it pencil out, so that there's an occupancy rate, much like in the case with the Putnam Building project in Bennington, where you had businesses and nonprofit institutions come forward and say, we will invest in this. We will take out a unit or 2 units in this project because we want to see it succeed. I think maybe it won't be town offices because it is going to be more expensive to do it that way than it would be to rehab the current building on Jeff Williams Way. But I think there's enough interest that particularly, given that other efforts to try to jumpstart housing so far haven't really borne fruit for various reasons, that some of which were not under anyone's control, that this ought to get done. I think and at some point, I think there are probably people in Manchester who will come forward as private investors or as nonprofit investors who will say, yes, I'll be part of this in order to make it happen. That's just a hunch. Just kind of looking at past projects and the way that things have happened in this town, and the way when push came to shove, people stepped up. And so, I mean, that's just a hunch. I mean, it's a complicated project, and it's, there's a reason that the town is spending ARPA money to try to study it and to get its I's dotted and its T's crossed. It's not easy to do. But I think there's definitely recognition that it's a big signal as well, to the community at large, that, hey, we're interested in this, and see, we're doing it. And maybe you could invest in that too.
Yeah. Well, as everyone knows, there's a tremendous need for housing around this town, and something like that would really be a nice start, but it would hardly be the full solution. But before I forget, I did want to just return to that clean heat standard veto, because one of the things that, over the course of this legislative session, I think Governor Scott reset the record for the number of vetoes the governor had issued, and I think in this past session, he vetoed, I believe, 6 bills, which I think is a record also for 1 year.
I think there's more coming too. Probably by the time people see this clip, there will have been more.
Right, and that clean heat standard one failed by the override in the House, failed by 1 vote. Mm-hmm. And one of those no votes was Linda Joy Sullivan of Dorset, who announced recently that she's not going to run for re-election. We now have 2 candidates have emerged there in Dorset, Liz Ruffa and Mike Rice, an organic farmer, which should be an interesting race there. But I'm just wondering if that clean heats, because one of the criticisms of Scott was that he waited very late in the game. It seems like, at least publicly, to weigh in, and then at the very last minute, when things were lined up, he says, "This is not what I want." And that was the same argument he made on the pension bill.
Right, when he was very late to the game.
Yes. Which was, I think, a historic override, because I don't think there's ever been a time before where 100% of the legislature, including Republicans, said, "Well, this is the best deal we're going to get on the pension bill," which of course is another big problem the legislature will be wrestling with for many years to come.
So let me talk clean heat standard first and then talk vetoes. On the clean heat standard, I think the governor's big problem with it was the fact that the standard itself, which was going to set, establish credits that heat dealers needed to purchase to to get them to sell more energy friendly heat sources rather than fossil fuels. I think there was a lot of concern that was going to go to the Public Utilities Commission and was never coming back to the legislature for a vote, which means the governor could do nothing about it. The future governor could never override what the legislature came back with as a policy, because the policy was never coming back to the legislature. There's certainly the impact on small business, which, proponents of the bill said, well, we're addressing that, and but I think those, I don't know exactly what the reasons were. We only had a couple of, it was very much a party line vote, other than Nelson Brownell of Pownell and Linda Joy Sullivan of Dorset. But I have to wonder if their concerns weren't about the fact that it was never coming back to the legislature, that it was, once this went forward, but then again, members are saying that there were going to be some checks, checks and balances built into the bill when it came back, for a report, that it wasn't going to be necessarily just a rubber stamp. I would think that with so much change coming in the legislature, there's a strong possibility that they'll try again. But I do wonder if maybe they'll re-examine whether the legislature has to have another look at this once they come to a conclusion about what the policy should be. As far as vetoes go, the second point, I mean, a lot seems to be made of the fact that the governor vetoes a lot of bills, but I've always wondered, well, what's he supposed to do with a bill that he doesn't agree with? I mean, is he supposed to just say, well, he's not a constitutional monarch. He has a voice in government, and he's been voted in by a pretty lopsided plurality the last couple elections. So I think he'd be remiss to just sort of let things slide if there was something that he felt truly strongly about. Now, that said, I do think that the pension veto was that might have been more of a political statement than anything, that he really wanted there to be a defined contribution aspect to this, even though everyone in the majority was never going to go along with it. The treasurer wasn't going to go along with it. And there was already a deal on the table that people felt they couldn't back down from. That seemed a little more performative than anything to me, frankly. And that's strictly my opinion. That's not putting that out for anyone else. No one else is saying that except Greg Sukiennik. I mean, when the veto is his opportunity to take part in the process. And more often than not, he sends those letters back with, hey, this is specifically what I wanted to see. And in instances when he does that and he's not super late to the game, they do work together and they do, come back with legislation that he can live with. It's when he's late to the game that it gets a little more problematic.
Well, we just have a couple of minutes left, Greg, and I just wanted to quickly kind of just do a quick review of some of the local races. We've touched upon them a little bit in the course of our conversation today, but in addition to the Dorset primary race, we have Kelly Piala, the representative up in Londonderry and Weston. She will be running again, but in a different district. Of course, among everything else, the legislature was redistricted, and not every district is the same as it was. And just meanwhile, elsewhere down in Shaftesbury, incumbent Representative David Durfee is running for re-election. He'll be challenged by Victor Harwood, a Republican, who ran against him in 2020, I believe, and lost in that race. So that'll be a rematch of that. I guess Kathleen James and Seth Bongartz will be running again. They've announced that. So
they're running again as a team. Brian Campion and Dick Sears are also running again as a team in the Senate side. So
the race that I think is going to be really one of the most interesting ones locally will be the county sheriff one.
Yes, we have 3 candidates. Do I have the name correct? Bo Alexander.
Yes.
And then James Gully and Lieutenant
Joel Howard, who was the deputy to Chad Schmidt, who was leaving.
Right. Also, Erica Marthage is also, running again for state's attorney. I'm not aware that anyone's running against her. I know that the Vermont ACLU has made this past week. They put out a press release and an announcement about a campaign trying to focus attention on state's attorneys' races because the prosecutors do have a lot of say in the way that individuals say in each county as to how the justice system works and what kind of plea bargains are available, what kind of charges are brought. Arnie Gottlieb, I believe it was. So it'd be interesting to see if, in the time we have left, I think it's about 6 days as of this taping for folks to file papers. I don't know if that applies to county races as well, whether she'll have an opponent. But as of this point, no. As of this point, she's the only candidate.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to leave it there for today, Greg. Boy, it's been an interesting couple of weeks there in Montpelier and just about everywhere else. But anyway, we will certainly be watching, and I'm sure have an opportunity to maybe around August when the primary happens to kind of analyze further. Well, we'll leave it there for now, and thanks again for taking the time to be with us and share your insights and views on that. And well, we'll return to the subject again, I'm sure. And thanks to all of you who've been with us today watching. I hope you found our program interesting, and well, we'll see you again the next time. And meanwhile, thanks again to Greg Sukiennik of Vermont News and Media, aka Bennington Banner, Manchester Journal, Brattleboro Reformer. And Greg, always good to have you on the show.
Indeed.
All right, take care.